Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We like to live in certainty. Like to. But the truth of the matter is that we're like on this swing that goes from certainty to confusion. We go back and forth. And the thing that keeps the ball rolling is this constant search, constant quest for the sense of fulfillment, which comes to us in the form of promises, either those we make for ourselves or those that we crave or seek out in the world around us. From others, from the world, from people, relationships. Anything that can promise us something that can get us to the sense of fulfillment, whatever that might morph into from one moment to the next. That's a total different story because things are always changing, and we know things are constantly changing. But we like to have our feet on solid ground somehow. So we're always looking. The mind is always thinking. The mouth always wants to say something, come out and spew out something. Always wanting to say something. And then as we trickle down, the body wants to always be doing something in some form of a motion. And that is the grossest form of the mind wanting to think. So the grossest form of that is the body always wanting to be doing, moving in time and space, which is behind the phenomenon that meditators or anyone who's sitting for a little bit of time, even a minute, if we're very cognizant, we'll see how much the body wants to move. Oh, let me, and it always has its justifications, obviously, right? Oh, this is pinching me. Oh, my knees are not in the right position. Let me readjust. Let me adjust. Oh, what was that? Let me open my left eyelid. Just take a, quick peek. Movement. That's another form of kileśas. That's another form of the defilements, by the way. We're always looking to make a discovery, to have a discovery take place. It gives us meaning, if you will. And there's nothing wrong with that. The Buddha emphasized this all throughout his teachings. One of the 4 requirements in right effort, especially when it comes to spiritual powers. The Buddha always starts with that curious element, that what he called the chanda. It's a desire. We're not against desire wholesale in the Dhamma, in Buddhism. What is the nature of that desire? What is the flavor of that desire? And that is extremely important. So when we're sitting to meditate, we are in the process of making a discovery. Now, this is different than making or looking for a discovery outside of ourselves, which is what's taking place. Because we think that in order for there to be some form of a discovery, there needs to be some form of action, some agitated movement. Hence, the body moves, hence the mouth needs to move, hence especially the brain, the mind. The mind is always trying to do its own tiny little calculations constantly. But real discovery happens on the inside, not on the outside. Because discovery, the way it is taught, the way I understand in this path, leads us to a state of contentment, a state of happiness, a state of joy, a state of understanding. And that's why we call it insight. It's a depth of understanding. Otherwise, Caltech or MIT should have been surrounded by blissed out scientists. Who are so relaxed with their discoveries. There's a lack in understanding of oneself, despite the fact that the person might have actually found a cure for something huge, something very problematic in humanity. But the genuine discovery ultimately falls back into our lap. So meditation needs to be a quest for discovering our greatest potential. Now, an element that needs to be addressed here in this whole process is a phenomenon, rather, is this phenomenon of compulsion, of feeling like you're forced to sit and meditate. It's almost like a bittersweet love and hate type of a relationship with meditation that many people have. It does not necessarily have to be so. When a person goes, let's say I use the example of a scientist going to the lab to delve more into looking at their experiment to see what's happening, or did they miss something? There's this desire, there's this curiosity, there's this joy, the thing that fuels their interest. There's almost this playfulness, like a kid trying to put some blocks, some toys together, constructing this narrative, and all of a sudden they're lost into this world, they're in the zone. A child doesn't play in a compulsory manner. In a way, it's like, oh, again, I'm going to play with toys, or I'm going to run around the house or outside. They're having fun. Just like that scientist was really lost in the lab, in the spirit of that experiment. We need some of that in our practice. Instead of having this sense that something is being forced upon us, or even forced upon the mind, that sense of compulsion takes out the whole fun out of it. It's out of the whole meditative process. And then meditation itself becomes a chore. How can there be insight coming out of that? We're not having fun. That's what I mean by fun. So we're essentially trying to find meaning in whatever we do. Trying to find meaning that can stop us from going like this seesaw, from state of uncertainty to the state of confusion, state of uncertainty to the state of confusion. And here and there we get some glimpses of some form of solidity. And then life comes and tells us that nothing is impermanent and nothing is permanent and everything is impermanent. And there's this thing that comes along with that, which is the pain, which gets us every single time and throws us in a spin. So we need to go after this trying to find meaning, and there's nothing wrong with it. That's the crucial part of the discovery process. So we want to have meaning in whatever we do, and that is the juice, that is the fuel that runs this thing that the Buddha called the holy life. This is the thing which in fact makes it holy. You don't have to be a bhikkhu or a bhikkhuni, a nun, a monk, to be living the holy life the way I see it. When we bring this sense of sacredness into our own lives, it makes it holy, because now our trajectory is very clear. We're not teeter-tottering between uncertainty, confusion, and tossed around in the wind of life and situations. We know where we're headed. How? Based on the many discoveries that we are making every time we are engaged in looking at the mind that is moving, and slowly that motion, that movement, that constant irritated state slows down further and slows down further until it reaches a moment where it's no longer shaking. And when the kileśas or the defilements show up, guess what? We see them. We see them. We're no longer taken for a ride by them. And this is another reason why teachers in the past have mentioned how the Dhamma and the heart, or the pure heart, call it the pure mind, chitta basically. The Dhamma and the chitta are one and the same. One and the same. Meanwhile, if we're not experiencing that, what that means is the kileśas are running the show, the defilements are running the show in the mind. And now the meditation process, when it is based on wisdom, understanding and discerning, when we have sati and we have sampajanya, those two things allow us to see clearly as to what is taking place. Who is in the driver's seat, basically, in the mind or in the heart? Chitta. What's running the show? The very act of asking this question means that we're taking responsibility of our progress versus our regression. That's why there is no standstill in practice. If we're not practicing, we're not in a standstill. We're not just, not making progress, but we're still here. No, we're either moving forward or we're moving backward. And that's why it's because time's running out all the time. Death is always there watching us. It's always there. It's happening. It's going to happen. So what am I doing? How am I actually spending my time? understanding this thing, this phenomenon called my life, this mind that seems to be running everything. But it itself, it's like out of control. So we alone take responsibility in the way that whether we are progressing or regressing on this path. And to constantly check the quality of the mind. And in relation to the discovery that I was mentioning earlier, the discovery itself, every time there is a discovery, which the Buddha used the word in English, insights, tiny little gems, panya, wisdom. Those aha moments. Ah, yes. Yeah, yes. That was always staring at me in the face, but I never saw it. But after that, you pass the point of no return. You can never go back and unlearn that, because you know it now visceral. Now it is your own understanding. And that's another key part of the Dhamma, the qualifier of Pacchatam Veditabbo Vinyuhita. One knows for oneself. And the more we know, the more we know, the more we know, the more we are shedding some light. And the kileśas are coming apart in a sense. They're being discovered. And in the very process of discovering, the Dhamma is revealed. Think of it as the smudge, the dust. It's being blown away. That's why in the heart of the Arahants, they say, it's indistinguishable. Their heart, their mind is the Dhamma. The Buddha was the Dhamma. He says it so many times. You see me, you see the Dhamma, he says. You look at the Dhamma, you see me. And that's how it is with an Arahant. That's why they're all on the same level. Somebody who's reached that level of Arahantship. The Buddha was the Arahant, of course. But so were his bhikkhunis, his nuns, his bhikkhus, all those who attained. The awakening, the Nibbāna, was the same. However, the Buddha had other abilities, and that's what makes him a Buddha. But as far as the awakening state is concerned, the heart, the mind, and the Dhamma resonate at the same frequency, if you will. When the defilements are exposed, layer by layer, with this sense of curiosity in doing this discovery, this way of looking and trying to find out as much as we can. And that cannot come from a sense of compulsory attitude, from compulsion, from, man, I have to sit down and meditate again. Or my teacher wants this to be done this way, or, this sutta, I'm so far away from this. Forget about it. Maybe in another life. So we give up often. So my encouragement is to have us change our attitude. Starting with the meditation, when we first sit to meditate, and all throughout the day, when we're in a dynamic position, we're always doing things. Can I bring in some sati into my day? Can I bring some curiosity? Why did I say that? Did I really feel like saying those words? Sometimes that's enough, just to ask that question. It's just enough, because it's shedding some light on something that always kept on being repeated. So we have this habitual pattern, negative cycles. So samsara is taking place moment to moment, not just from life to life, but it's happening throughout our day, it seems, right? All of a sudden you see this pattern, and then you go, that has some element of panya there. If we are looking at it with pure eyesight, with the understanding. So our whole life becomes then an adventure. Not as something that I have to do to get from point A to point B and then to point C. It's not a linear fashion, the progress like that. It's when you're developing on so many levels. Things start to happen in different ways. Your behavior changes. Your attitude changes from moment to moment. And it's not necessarily going to happen somewhere out there in the distance when this so-called Nibbāna takes place. And you start talking funny to people or whatever. No, it's the tiny little gems that start popping all over the place in your life. With so many moments of insight peppered in throughout your day. But let's start to look at meditation not as something compulsory, or even trying to have mindfulness throughout the day, not looking at it as like, can I just live my life blindly first for an hour? Can I just go and do things like I normally would have, habitually, blindly, like a car that's spinning and you're just closing your eyes and crossing your arms and just hoping that you won't crash into something? Where's the fun in that? Let's see where we're going. I will stop here and see if there's any comments, questions, critiques, thoughts. Yes, take it.
I will try my best to make this short because my son always said that I lecture too long. So, and I just want to give a testimony and express my gratitude. It's not because I don't want to share what's happening in my life. It's a lot of chaos in my life right now. But I just want to say that the fact that every single week I sit here, I learn something. And the most important thing about mindfulness is just so helpful. Whatever I'm going through, even when I'm in the middle of like really crazy things, like, what are you doing? You know, your son is in the hospital. Why am I sitting, for 2 hours here? But so I just want to kind of tell the whole group, the people who have been here week after week, not only you, but like, for instance, you Patissa, who in the middle of the night is doing this. I mean, these are such models that this is so important. And I just want to tell, because I think I saw a couple new faces today, that please just come every week, and then you will see the benefit really filtering to the rest of your life. And I'm one of the probably worst students in that I do not sit as often as the rest of you, but I apply what you said about just doing the mindfulness at every moment. And that leads to what I really want to share, that I feel is the Golden Dharma. One, of course, compassion matter is very important in everything we do. But two, never act out of anger. Even with all these terms that we call righteous indignation, I think can be very destructive. And I feel that, sometimes we say, well, what, is morally wrong? What someone's doing is morally wrong, and you get so angry over that. And this is now what I'm coping with people who are trying to help me, who try to get my son's father back, and they got so angry. They say, how can you do that? I say, you want someone to help. You don't want to infuriate the person who is coming to help. So it's like, I just feel all that Dhamma is so relevant. And most of all, I don't want anyone to lose their mind because of my son's condition. So I said the equanimity. So I just want to give a testimony saying that I just hope that all of us can never lose our mind, no matter what's happening. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. It's Dhamma becomes alive when we see its correlation, its direct correlation to our lives, to the very fabric of our lives. And we see how it is infiltrating every element, every layer of our lives, relationships, connections, attitudes that we have towards circumstances, and even our beliefs. Beliefs, the Buddha used different words for it. He used ditti or miccāditi, wrong view. Usually that's how it's translated in English, or just views. Just the word view also denotes in this practice this sense of attachment, clinging to, no, this is my position, thank you very much, and I'm not going to listen another moment of this other nonsense that's coming out, because this has served me and I have a loyalty to it. I need to keep to that. Is view. That is ditti or miccāditi, opposite of sammaditthi, which is the very first factor of the Eightfold Path. Now, unfortunately, many people have been teaching, not just in the West, that there is this thing called justified anger or something like that. That is utter nonsense, completely non-Dhamma. There's no way that anyone can justify that and still be called Dhamma and still have anything to do with the Dhamma. Why? Because as you pointed out, there's anger there. When there's anger, there is what? Tremor in the mind, the friction, the movement. It's in fact no longer just a slight movement. It is chaos in the mind. And how can there be any wisdom coming from out of a chaotic mind? It's impossible. There needs to be the settling of the dust, the mud in the glass of water. Then it needs to settle. Then you will open up and you'll see what's in front of you, the situation. That's another reason why I've constantly mentioned so many times, so many people, sometimes the same people would be asking me the same question with good intention about, we have to have social justice, this and that. We have to go outside, march, and fine, perfect. We have to change the world around us to the better, of course. However, what is my mindset? Am I picking up a brick and throwing it at this person who I am disagreeing with, destroying their property? Am I engaged in some form of a defamation or, trying to sully their reputation in sophisticated manners? Which means there's hatred, by the way, dosa, and anger. So anger cannot be sophisticated. No matter how much we sugarcoat it with our, language. And that's why I don't put that much faith in language, which we've bastardized it very well these last few decades. The person might look at you and say the sweetest words, or the most neutered type of words, sentences, and you're like, okay, but there's nothing being said, really, of substance. And then the surface gets a little bit scratched. All of a sudden, you see what was lying underneath those words. There's anger, there's hatred, there's disgust, there's contempt. All of which go contrary to Brahma Viharas, which you pointed out. Metta, Karuna, Mudita, Upekkha. Loving kindness, compassion, altruistic or sympathetic joy, when your happiness is my joy, 100%. And there is a sense of upekkha, which is equanimity, this balance, despite what we're seeing around us. Because the dust will settle outside as well, whether we like it or not, in time, so long as we have not engaged in it, lost our sense of direction. Because it's like driving a Lamborghini at high speed on the road, and all of a sudden you decide to make, just tiny little motions on the steering wheel. Good luck. This thing is going to be rolling in the air 30, 40 times before it comes to a full stop, a crash rather. That is how anger is. And it's like lies, telling lies as well. Sometimes the mind says, well, let me just say this innocent lie to cover this up. Soon enough, it's going to be in need of another layer, a little bit thicker layer of a lie, saying falsehood, and then another layer, and then another layer. All of a sudden, it's like a snowball coming at us. So how much are we willing to justify the kileśas, the defilements in the heart, in the mind? That's what we're talking about. Because the kileśas are masters at, they know us better than we know ourselves, because they've been with us forever. And that's why they cannot coexist with the Dhamma. If it is the Dhamma that we seek, then we need to expose the kileśas for what they are. And the only way you could do that is by sitting, meditating, becoming more mindful, and taking that meditation, products of it, during the sit, throughout the day, which brings about more and more insight, which the Buddha called sampajanya. So these two go hand in hand to further exposing the kileśas for what they are. The more we do that, the more the Dhamma comes alive, and we start seeing things that we never actually saw before. And the views come apart. They just melt in front of the fireplace like butter. And they're gone. The more we practice this, the more we see this, and all of a sudden there's no way for the butter to come and to clutter our view, in a sense. So I hope that was helpful. And thank you for the sharing of your personal experiences with the practice. Lovely. Any other thoughts, comments, questions?
Just to say 100% agree, but it's much harder to convince young people. People who are in their 20s, people who are teenagers, righteous anger is unjustifiable. It's bad for you. It's really hard. It's even hard to convince some older people, especially men, but it's very hard with young adults. They just feel that they are being so right in their, fighting for social justice, fighting for other people not doing their duties, responsibilities. But I fully agree with you. And I think any action done out of anger is a destructive action.
I agree. And then remember the convincing part. Be careful of that. Just put a spotlight on that. Why do I want to convince anybody of anything?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And because we all have our own devices of hermeneutics, our own interpretive devices of looking at and understanding and seeing the world in a certain way, wanting to see it in a different way. So that is displeasing to us. And that is a subtle dosa right there, subtle level of hatred. So remember, it's all about us. It's not about the world around us. So can I use these individuals, the 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, whatever? And by the way, the youngest arahants that I have come to learn about through the suttas were 7 years old. Boys, 7-year-old. Arahants, full arahants. Imagine that. So holding on to our own perceptions of, well, this or that, labels, things like this, always be ready to be completely disassemble those notions that we hold because those are essentially also views, ditti. Because if I go and ask the other person, they're going to give me a total different perspective, view. Might be flawed, of course, but still their view. So the grass grows by itself, as they say. The leaf will fall when it's time for it to fall. But we can create the necessary conducive, shall we say, wholesome environment for that. And the best way to do that is just like in teaching. The teacher has to become the role model, or like a therapist. The therapist has to become the role model of what it is that they want to instigate in a positive sense, to bring forth, to encourage the other person, their patient, or the student in the case of the teacher, to bring that, to inculcate that quality out of them. So sometimes you don't even have to say a word because people are observant, usually. Especially when there are anomalies. They're like, wait a minute, you're supposed to get mad. Because I know you used to get mad. What happened there? This is unusual. Let me try something to trigger you. And this is where your sati and sampajanya have to be impeccable. They need to be there. So without saying a word about the Dhamma, the practice, or convincing them, the way you carry yourself suddenly is teaching so much. And you haven't even said a single letter, a single word of the Dhamma. You can change so much in a person. So yeah. Other thoughts, comments? Yes, Russell.
Yes, thank you, Bhante. Yeah, I wanted to maybe for you to say a little more about, you were talking about the fact that words sometimes are not sufficient, or they have been kind of neutralized or been so commodified that, you know, they lose their meaning. So my question, kind of in relation to KK's thing about, you know, trying to communicate with a younger person, or maybe a person who's not even a Buddhist, but are there other strategies in which one can communicate certain things without using words? Like, for instance, I mean, even things like, I don't know, like cooking, martial arts, housekeeping. I'm just curious how, in a practical manner, one could communicate certain ideas, like, say, you know, without giving a lecture, without, you know, using certain words. Are there sort of strategies that one could use to communicate with other people?
And Russell has been helping me, so I just want to add that. So he is not just asking an abstract question. He has been helping me, and I'm really thankful. Actually, he's a model that you were talking about. Just by being he is helping to my young.
Oh, I don't think so. I'm a compulsive hippie. Just
no, because my son thought so highly of Russell, so his friends kind of look up to Russell as being able to help my son. So in that sense, you're helping a lot indirectly.
So I would like to answer the question.
Yeah.
The way I have experienced this phenomenon, the dynamic between younger individuals and an adult, something that I noticed even not in the 20-year-old necessarily, but even in teenagers years ago as a high school teacher, and then later on as a therapist, etc., is that, you know, during a lifetime, no matter how long that lifetime is, individuals are picking up information. They're reading us meaning the adults around these individuals. So if both of you happen to be professors, educators in the field and different fields, and you have a powerful position, or you are a parent, somebody who is, other people are looking up to as far as responsibility, taking care of them, bringing them food, etc., etc. That already clouds a person's or puts a screen between you both, you and the individual. Now, as the person grows up, they're getting different perspectives. They're getting exposed to life, etc., etc. And meanwhile, they will see certain things that don't match in what you're saying and your behavior. And guess what? That creates resentment. They might not say it, but it is creating resentment, which is another reason why younger people look at adults as dubious characters, as individuals that are not to be trusted fully, because you guys don't make sense, because you're dishonest, basically. I've worked with teenagers, and if you've ever sat in a room for like 40 teenagers and they're ready to tear you apart within the first 2-3 seconds, I'm not exaggerating, and they will figure you out within a few minutes at the most. Few minutes, they will figure you out. If you give them a sheet of paper and say, what is this person all about? Could you tell us? They will really get 9 out of 10 points correct. Russell, you said something in your question. You said, being authentic. That's what it is. That's how I would address your question. Because we've forgotten to be authentic to ourselves, and especially to the younger generation, to those people that, well, we were in a position of power at one point or another. So it's not a matter of the words, it's a matter of behavior, the doing part. So, and you said another word, Russell, you said, I don't know. That is a golden key that has opened up so many doors, for me at least. When I stand in front of a crowd, let's say teenagers, and they would ask you so many different questions. Again, it really doesn't matter if the crowd that are listening to you are 20-year-olds or 30 or whatever. They're still looking for the same thing, authenticity. And if they're not looking for answers per se, they're looking for authenticity. And as grown-ups, we've forgotten to be that way, because maybe we've never been taught. Because we were also surrounded by other adults. So we've mimicked them to the point of becoming complete fallacies ourselves, embodiments of false views. So, but it's completely, it can be remedied very quickly. Just say, you know what, I don't know. I know that when they would ask me questions on some issues like some new discoveries in science or in biology, and I really genuinely didn't know something very new or modern, whatever, I would look at them and say, you know what? I don't know. And they're like, there's a momentary pause, almost like a gasp. It's like, oh, you don't know? Yes, I don't know. That makes the person suddenly, the teacher, the adult, the father, the mother, whoever, suddenly become human. Guess what? That screen between you and them, one of those screens at least, one of those thick, obscure, opaque layers has been removed. Why? Because of the presence of authenticity. Your words mean nothing, ultimately. They mean nothing. When I heard this statement, it was in the late 90s, I think, when I was doing acting classes I was taking, and one of the instructors said, your words mean nothing. I was like, how could that be true? And he said, give me any phrase, 2-3 word phrase. And I did, and then he started layering with emotion and life in the way that he expressed it. Each time, even though the words were absolutely mundane, each time he said it with some intentionality and form of expression, I exactly, in the whole class, knew what he was trying to say, which had nothing to do with the meaning, with the words. He was saying, I love you. He said, I am going to kill you. He said, I am going to love you forever. He said, I despise you, without using any of these words, but just using, let's say, something like, close the window, let's say. Has nothing to do with any of those emotions, but he was manifesting it. Why? Because there was the acting out, the bringing forth of authentic form of expression, if you will, that words can never truly capture. So even the words, I don't know, if it's, as long as it's not being acted, fake in a sense. So it's coming from an authentic place, it can really open doors and can make wonders happen. So I would approach it like that. That's my...
No. Thank you. I think it's a good good answer, because, especially teachers and all, you think that you're supposed to know the answers, even if you don't know. Then if you don't know, you can at least fake it. I mean, I kind of went through life, my various jobs, and sort of like fake it till you make it. And, I would say it kind of worked, but that was my dictum, fake it until you make it, because I didn't know anything, but I wasn't going to say it, at least, on the job. So it's sort of like fake it till you make it. But, I mean, I think obviously that's not so good, actually, in the long run. Thank you.
Great question. Other thoughts, comments? Yes, Greg.
A quick response. Sorry.
Please, Greg, you had a question or a comment?
Yes, I was interested to hear you bring up those 7-year-old boys or 7-year-olds who are Arahants. I don't know whether they're boys or not. And I'm guessing, at least in Theravada Buddhism, everyone's goal is to become an Arahant. So I've given some thoughts to what it would be like to be an Arahant and compare that to who I am now, so that we can then plan the changes that we need to create to get to that place. And I was also reading in the last few days, and I forget which sutta it was, but there's a sutta where the Buddha gave a talk to, there were 1,250 Arahants there. They were all Arahants, and they'd all come to listen to the Buddha talk. And that struck a bell with me, that they're Arahants. They already know everything the Buddha knows. Why are they there listening to his teaching? There comes a time when we want to get to the other shore, that we're done with the raft. And when we put the raft down, we don't need it anymore. These guys should be doing what Arahants do. And to my mind, that is out there spreading the word and trying to reduce the suffering of everybody else. So again, why were they wasting time, in effect, listening to the Buddha? So I'm interested to, when I hear you talk about these 7-year-old Arahants, and I don't know how well you know their situation, but can you just talk about the lifestyle of these guys? Are they just in a monastery somewhere? I'm guessing at 7-year-olds, they're probably not able to go out and teach and reduce others' suffering yet. I'm just trying to get clear in my mind what a 7-year-old Arahant would be like.
Mm-hmm. I'm not an Arahant. So just to set the tone there, but I love your question, because it addresses or talks about, mentions some curiosities, to say the least, that are there. And ultimately, how is this relevant? How is Arahantship relevant, or going to be relevant in my life, in the life of society? And other elements to it, like, why would an Arahant go and sit in front of the Buddha to hear Dhamma? I mean, isn't their job done, basically? Sometimes we like to think of things in a very you know, we would like to plastic wrap, we like to put things in a nice little box and say, well, this is what it is because I'm not there yet, and this is, you know, this is how it, well, the person has completely removed the shackles of ignorance, for example, or got rid of all the fetters, sanyojanas. So they're now clean, if you will, for lack of a better word. They're now there, the there that I'm not there yet. So they're supposed to, that comes in, they're supposed to not have these things, these tendencies that I myself have, for example. And that might be relevant on some level, but what it often does, at least the way I used to approach it, that's where I'm coming from, in my own understanding, to my own experience, and, is that we try to strip the individual, the personality, out of the Arahant, because they've almost like become beyond human in a sense. They are so separated from the reality that I know. They live in a different dimension, if you will. So they become less and less human and more otherworldly. And this is a thing that they also, not that there is a correlation here, but the only reason why I mention it is because of the similarity in what the human brain likes to do. And this has to do with Christ, let's say, Jesus. When they, for centuries, the Christian forefathers had to have all these theological debates and all that, writing thesis after thesis to kind of negotiate both of these qualities, one being human, the other one godly or God-like or God. So how could they coexist type of a thing? So that's what I am reminded of. When in both cases, they actually lost the meaning. So they lost the forest for the trees. And this is what happens because when you look at an Arahant and read the stories, thankfully we have the Theragatas and the Therigatas, which are the poems, the sayings of Arahant, both male and female monastics in the Buddhist tradition. And sometimes you see the ways of expression that are so individualized. And even when we look at some of the Arahants from our own contemporary, you could even say, like in the case of Ajahn Mun or Ajahn Mahabua, the man would seemingly get angry. He would, and it's caught on camera. And at one point he was asked about the Dhamma to the point where he starts to cry. Well, wait a minute. If you read some commentators, they'll say it's impossible for an Arahant to feel those emotions, to be susceptible to crying, for example. That's not supposed to happen. And in fact, some people in Thailand started addressing that and even criticizing this old Arahant. And the way he came back, he addressed it as like, when the heart is empty of kileśas, your life is the Dhamma. And when you are talking from that space, it's so overwhelmed because you're still encaptured within the five aggregates. This is what I wanted to come back to. The five aggregates, so long as we are still in this body, we are susceptible to some influences, to emotional, behavioral manifestations that these five dictate, given certain set of circumstances, but you will come out from a point of purity. So those two Arahants will still be Arahants, but at the same time, they will still be 7-year-olds in their perhaps playfulness. And there's one incident that was very poignant for me when I don't know if they were those two 7-year-olds, but they might have grown up. They're in the book that was edited by Bhikkhu Bodhi, The Great Disciples of the Buddha. I highly recommend that book, by the way. And in it, it's talking about the samanas. Samanas are those that are still not in the age range to get the higher ordination, meaning they're younger than 20-year-olds. So they, some wealthy couple send their servant over to the Sangha, to the Buddha, and they say, Lord, please send us 2 arahants or 4 arahants, or no, they don't say that. They say a few of your senior bhikkhus, senior as in those who have attained. I don't know what phrases they use, but basically they were trying to get arahants to come so that they could serve them food and make offerings so that they will gain many merits. Now, the Buddha looks and sends 4, I think that was the number, 4 samanas, not full-on grown-up adult bhikkhu arahants, but younger kids for all intents and purposes. But they were all arahants. So they go to this person's house to eat. Now they sit. And the husband and wife and, these, rich people, they look and they're very displeased. Because what is this? These are obviously not senior bhikkhus. So they sent the servant back and they say, send us senior monks. So I think at that point, both Venerable Mahamoggallana and Venerable Sariputta go to the house. And they see and they recognize immediately that these are arahants like us. And they look at the food that's laid out, and it's not enough for 6 people. I might be getting the numbers wrong, by the way, so I apologize, but I'm going off of what I remember. And that's not the point, the numbers, but what happens. And they sit there, and then they realize there's not enough. And without saying a word, pretty much, they get up and leave. So the 4 are sitting there. Meanwhile, their clock is ticking because they have to eat before noon. And they're getting hungry. And then finally something happens, and I don't know if it was the Lord Buddha or another senior monk who comes. Oh no, the Devas come, and the Sakka comes in actually. And he has to intervene because he sees that the young samanas, the arahants, are really getting hungry, and it's not conducive because now these potential donors are going to get some very bad consequences for starving 4 arahants. So the Sakka, the king of the gods, intervenes. I don't know if he puts on a human garb or whatever. He just tells the host and the hostess, hey, these are arahants. And actually, he bows down to the 4 arahants, and that's when they get the point. That despite the age, these are full arahants. Now that there is a quality that comes in, and this is my presumption, this is my own educated guess, if you will, from going through the suttas and et cetera, that there are certain qualifiers that need to be present. And what I was mentioning to Russell as far as the behavioral changes that must take place need to be there for the rest of us to identify some things about this individual, about this character. However, that does not negate the fact that these individuals also are human. So they have certain personality quirks, if you will. And I don't know if I'm able to, if I am in the ballpark of answering your question, by the way, Greg.
It's all interesting.
Okay, good. Yes, so I guess the best way to get 100% adequate convincing or satisfying answer is for the person to become an arahant and know it for yourself. That's the invitation. And your curiosity in asking these beautiful questions, today's, is a great sign, in fact, because that curiosity, which is what I was talking about earlier, about the chanda, the desire to know, to understand for oneself, is really the thing that takes us to that discovery for oneself. As to how does that feel? Would I look at things differently? Would I see things differently? But it's not going to be like a bucket of ice cold water dumped on our heads. There are many, many, many moments of Nibbāna that take place. If there is the discernment to see during our daily mundane, so-called mundane life, and it won't remain mundane, that's the point. The life of the Arahant, from what I have gathered, is not mundane. And I recently translated one of the suttas in the Anguttara Nikaya, I think it's called, Kavi Sutta. And the Buddha talks about poets. 4 kinds of poets, he says. One poet is the one who gets to write poetry or speak poetry through reflection and thinking. Another one is when they are teaching others. And the third one is when they are seeing things around them, they see poetry. And the fourth one, he says, is everything they touch turns to poetry. Everything they see is poetry. When they speak, etc., etc. That is the Arahant. Your life is poetry now. And as far as the Ovada Patimokkha, the one that you were referring to, the 1250 Arahants, I just yesterday, in fact, because yesterday was the day of the Magha Puja day, which is the day where that event took place. And 1250 Arahants that had been ordained by Lord Buddha himself. They had become bhikkhus by his own, well, he was the preceptor in a sense. Out of the blue, suddenly they walk to where the Buddha was. And he was in the Veluvana monastery. It wasn't a monastery then, but it's the bamboo forest. And in the city of Rajgir. And they all congregated there and they sat. And that's when the Buddha gave the Ovada Patimokkha, which is a very simplified set of instructions in the form of few verses, 3 verses. And because, as I mentioned in the past, for 20 years or so, the bhikkhus and bhikkhunis didn't have the Vinaya per se. There were no need for precepts. But it was only later on where you had a lot of shady characters coming in and joining because of the affluence and things that being a monastic could bring, especially in those days, that many negative characteristics and behavioral patterns were coming in. So there were necessary for limitations and precepts to be put in place. But the 3 verses reflect on just basic rudimentary, if you will, the set of instructions, which obviously Arahants don't need. And this is where I come back to your question. But why? Well, these were missionaries. These were individuals that were sent out by themselves to different parts of India. We can always be open to new sets of information, even as when we're talking about Arahants. And that's why the Buddha constantly gave instructions to Sariputta, to Moggallana, to Mahakachana, Mahakassapa, etc. They were always learning something. So it's not like you have an access to the database, the server of Arahants. Now you're all knowing. No, the Buddha was not all knowing in the sense that he would know how the mechanism of my laptop works. okay, or what type of lenses I need for my prescription glasses. So sometimes, that's where we bring in our own Judeo-Christian thinking of omniscience. Well, no. That's like, apples and oranges comparison. But what it is, the question is, when the Buddha was asked a question and he's talking about, let's say somebody's referring to a certain dynamic which is drenched in wrong view, a behavioral situation or why they're suffering, the Buddha was never short of words or explanations to get the person to see what the reality of the situation was. So that's another form of understanding and having the understanding knowledge. Now, when they were going around, many of these arahants might have also had the difficulty in saying something that is, if you will, codified. And that's what the Ovada Patimokkha served as for almost 20 years. And what it is basically very simple. One of them, for example, is it starts with patience, forbearance. He says any bhikkhu, and in those days when he's referring to a bhikkhu, they're arahants, setting the bar high for all bhikkhus that followed. So forbearance, anyone who has anger cannot be called a true ascetic, especially not a follower of the Buddhas, he says. Another one is the one that really stood out once when I first heard this was not eating too much, eating just enough. Because in those days, there were no rules about how many meals they could have. Now, of course, the Arahants knew they would stop when they felt, okay, it's enough. Because they don't have attachment to food. They know that I'm just eating this to sustain these aggregates. I mean, the 4 elements in my body, so that these 5 aggregates could function. Because as an Arahant, you do not live for anyone, for yourself anymore, in a sense, because your job is done. The only reason why you're sustaining existence in the 5 elements, in the 5 aggregates, is to simply give. That's it. You're just there for the Dhamma. And any way that you could deliver it in a way that you can be more useful to the world around you, you're ready to take it to like a sponge. And when the Buddha gave a talk, you would rush to go and see him, unless you're not an Arahant yet. And there was one monk at the moment of the last few hours of the Lord Buddha's life who did not go to sit along with the multitude of bhikkhus and bhikkhunis and other beings who were there. And they came and snitched about this monk to the Buddha. And they said, Lord, can you believe this guy? He knows you're dying, but he's sitting there. He's meditating. And the Buddha, I don't know if he calls them over or whatever, just to point out how wrong they were. And he says, my son is practicing, and that is exactly what you should be doing. And he becomes an Arahant, that individual, because he knew that that's the greatest way to reward one's teacher, the Buddha, because he gave and gave and gave for 45 years. And he's going to go, while this guy hasn't reached it yet, tasted the fruits. No, I'm going to pay him back. And that's how the Buddha always refers back to, if you want to pay puja or make any offerings to me, the best way you could do that is by attaining that which I have attained. So that's a justifiable reason why you can skip a Dhamma talk given by the Buddha. Otherwise, go there as fast as you can. Yes, Dhammadina, you had a question. Sorry, I can't answer all these texts that I'm getting, but go ahead.
Bhante, thank you. More of a comment on Greg's question. Excuse me. As you were answering, I was reminded bits and pieces from the suttas where we see that Arahants are also meditating in their daily routine. And I was just reminded of, the fact that they had to sit, or we see them practicing throughout the day. I was reminded of the disenchantment factor, because we know that when one becomes an arahant, as you just mentioned, there is no desire to leave. You persist so that you can alleviate the suffering of others. So I can only imagine that these bhikkhus or bhikkhunis, they would look for solitude, for place to away from society, and meditation, I think, would be their way to nourish their mind, to make it for them to make life bearable, given what the level of their citta. And I also was reminded of the fact that the Buddha himself would sit. Also, we have those occasions where the Buddha, when he was physically ill, he asked a few of his disciples to recite the Bhujangas, the 7 factors of awakening. So I think all of these are helping us see that even the citta of an arahant, given that they have a physical body and the level of disenchantment, there would be certain conditions or environments that would be most helpful. And meditation, of course, it would be, I think, something that, again, would make life bearable in the physical body. Just wanted to add those. Thank you.
Thank you for that. It's absolutely on point, because as we practice, as the person goes and experiences and sees the Dhamma, meaning they've reached the Sotapanna stage, the first stage, there is tremendous amount of disenchantment and viraga, which is dispassion towards things. As the person progresses, these intensify and intensify and intensify. And that is one of the reasons why when a person becomes an arahant, if they are not living the recluse life, if they're not bhikkhus or bhikkhunis, they will not sustain that life. They will die, because the level of disenchantment is so great. There's nothing that can hold them to normal lay life anymore. There's no desire. Okay? The only thing that animates them, the only thing that they're living for at that moment is the Dhamma. I've had I was listening to one commentator, well-known Buddhist monk commentator, when he was asked about a state of mind where there is the desire not to exist anymore for a bhikkhu. And he had to scratch his head. He couldn't understand. And he said, I don't know what would lead a person to do that, or to be in that state. And in a way, it is sad, because it's all around us. When a person has tasted the Dhamma, this enchantment becomes part and parcel of one's life. It's in every gasp of air. It's in every thought is holding the hands of this enchantment. It gets more and more if the person is continuing on the path. And as if they're entered the path, meaning a stream enterer, they're on the path. Sometimes stream enterers can be lazy, deliberately putting off becoming mindful, or sitting, not wanting to sit, for example. But whether they like it or not, the stream is taking them, because they live, whether they like it or not, again, they live according to the Eightfold Path. Now, that necessitates for the person to be around others who resonate at the same frequency, meaning share the Dhamma with them, or at least sit in the comfort of knowing that there is such a person. Venerable Anuruddha and Venerable Kimbala and Nandiya, they lived together, 3 of them in the forest, in the Gosinga park, in the Gosinga forest. And only once every 5 days they would come together to talk about the Dhamma, but they lived together. They enjoyed each other's company. but without saying a word. If there was not enough water in the buckets, and a person then would take the buckets and go to the stream or the river, fill it up and bring him. And if he couldn't bring him up, he would just use hands gestures and things and just clap, but not talking. But they enjoyed being around each other. And once a week they would talk on the Dhamma. They didn't have to. They were Arahants already. They were Arahants already. But it becomes, there's no point in just wanting to be alone. Now, there are cases where an Arahant simply, again, this is what I was mentioning earlier to Greg about the personality. The personality of the Arahant would, again, this is coming from the suttas in the history of the Arahants. Venerable Candana, Anya Candana, the first who became an Arahant, the first of the 5 disciples, original 5. After he became an Arahant, you don't hear about him in the suttas much. But he enjoyed being alone in the jungle, in the forest. And he didn't like people. And he didn't enjoy them. He enjoyed teaching the animals and the devas. That's how he was known for. And but he would come sporadically, or once every, I think one time he was coming in, I think it had been like a decade or so, or years, to see his teacher. And some of the younger bhikkhus looked at him and was like, who is this guy in rags, tattered? Well, what is this? Probably he wasn't even shaved, because he's living in the forest. He's not breaking any precepts. He's just there by himself. Animals are bringing him food. He's fine. But he wasn't one of those that, let's say, who would live with Venerable, Moggallana, or even Venerable Ananda. Venerable Ananda loved to be around people. And that was one of the reasons why he hadn't been an Arahant, until about a month after the Buddha died. So personalities play a huge role in this, but they need the daily sustenance of being surrounded by individuals, or being at least one, or listening to the suttas any way they can, to nourish oneself. And that is how I approach it, how I understand it. So I hope it's being useful, what I'm sharing with you here today. And this is only one person's perspective, of course. I encourage you guys to go and research it and look for the answers further, and the discoveries to be made within us. That's something worth writing home about. So I know we've gone over, but it's a very important topic, and that's why I see myself to be alive for. So, was there a hand? Somebody raised a hand.
I think Upatissa was about to say something.
Oh, yes.
Okay, my understanding is that an Arahant is simply a personification of the Dhamma. Like the Buddha always said, when you see me, you see the Dhamma, and when you see the Dhamma, you see me. And so, well, the Buddha and the Arahants are simply personifications of the Dhamma. So a natural tendency for Arahants would be to be together with what is conducive to the Dhamma, and away from what is not Dhamma. So that's how I understand an Arahant's tendency, to be with other Arahants, and especially the Buddha. I hope that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. The disenchantment, the dispassion, make it impossible for the kileśas, the defilements, to be in the heart, which is now completely the Dhamma. That's what I was saying earlier. And as you pointed out again, one who sees the Dhamma sees the Buddha or the Arahant, if they're true Arahants. Because unfortunately, there are individuals in this world today who claim to be Arahants. Some of them are even lay people, which that's like a laughing matter at that point, because the impossibility of it. But the person's life becomes the Dhamma. There's nothing to sustain it otherwise. If you want to take it into metaphysical, it's like, it becomes a philosophical issue. But because if the person is not there, then we tend to assume and presume. But the closest thing to get to that understanding is coming back to what we were saying earlier about a mind that lacks anger. There isn't a movement. There isn't that movement in the mind of the Arahant. They don't make new action. They are living it. They respond to situations, but they don't make new kamma. But they still have to deal with the past kammas of past actions, because they're still inhabiting a body that is the conglomeration, the aggregation of all these 5 elements, of 5 things. They have to respond because there's still the dust of the past can come in. And it does, and that's why the Buddha used to suffer from backache, and other bhikkhus, arahants, used to suffer from other things in the body. But they would never have the impact of, let's say, psychological issues, emotional issues. They wouldn't have those things. It's just physical that they have to deal with, because guess what? They're inhabiting still a human body. They have to sustain that. They still need food. They still have to go to the bathroom. They have to gargle. They have to brush their teeth. The body's failing meanwhile. Now, how long does the Arahant want to sustain that? That's another question. And that is very individual. Some bhikkhus and bhikkhunis wanted to end it because they've reached that point. And there's I don't want to turn this into like things for some people to chew on, but there's a thing called justifiable use of the knife type of a thing, where some Arahants chose to end their lives because they felt that it was time for them to go. They didn't want to run and take care of this body anymore. They have completed the task. Because it really becomes very, very difficult to sustain life. And but it's nothing gloomy either. Some people, because individuals, majority of us are not there of that level of disenchantment, we, as human beings, we look at this as something foreign, which takes me back to that concept of like putting people in a box, especially an Arahant. An Arahant is supposed to be this. Just like in the old days, in British Empire, people used to think that the Queen of England did not sweat, did not perspire, because she was her skin was supposed to be this way. All these delusional, conclusions that we have. We detach the image, the presence of the Arahant from us. And our relationship to that possibility for ourselves also becomes distant. And we need to be careful of that. So that's why I said it's not something out there into the future. We can taste it now. Slowly, small, mini. How much am I holding on to this fearful emotion that, oh my God, this can happen to me, or this phone call, or this email? Because the more I tightly hold on to it, the more it's going to hurt. Okay, That's where I'm using the Four Noble Truths, and I let go, and I feel the third noble truth. I feel the cessation. That is the Nibbāna. That is the Nirodha. That is applying sati and sampajanya. That is applying wisdom. Already I am doing what the Arahant does on a day-to-day basis without thinking. That is the modus operandi. That is the method that it unfolds for them. Meanwhile, we are using a lot of training wheels. Every time we're applying sati and sampajanya, those two training wheels. That way we don't have to live so far from that possibility of arahantship. That's what I would like to add to that, what you just shared. Instead of looking at it just as a phenomenon that is full of disenchantment towards life, which it is, but there's more. There's more. We need arahants in this world to inspire us. And my hope is that each of you will taste that, and all of us could taste that sooner than later. Because that can become, that is the true refuge. One of the three refuges that we take, Sangha, and not something outside of ourselves. So I will stop here. Lovely questions. Thank you for your input and sharing. So now we'll dedicate the merits. May suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find health relief. May all beings share in these merits that we have thus acquired, for the achievement of all kinds of wholesome happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share in these merits of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you all be well. Please stay safe. Keep smiling. Have a lighter touch in everything. And have fun. Be curious about making tiny little discoveries all throughout your day. See you next week.